get going. So thanks for coming. First, just a quick introduction. I don't want to spend too long on this stuff. We really want to jump into the activities and discussions. My name is John Cutler. I'm a product manager. I've had some experience with UX research and business analyst roles. I got started a little late in product management. I spent my 20s playing music. And I had a video game actually called Last Call. That's not what you want to call your bartending simulation, because you can't, like, what's the follow-up to Last Call? Oh, After Hours. No, we actually had an answer for it. It was After Hours. But yeah, so I did work at a company called Pendo. They're sponsoring this. I don't work at Pendo anymore. That gave me a kind of great opportunity to go out and talk with a lot of product folks, so that was a real blessing for my career. So my customers have been product development teams, and that was wonderful. Most recently, I was at Zendesk. It's kind of a multinational company at the moment now, but we're expecting first kid in April, so I've made kind of a life shift to something that will hopefully keep me at home more often. So I wanted to start out this talk. Is everyone kind of warmed up? Do you need the icebreaker thing, the jumping around or anything? It seems like people were pretty active before, so we could actually even skip that if people are interested. The topic of this, I wanted to set it up a little bit because over the years, what I started to notice is that there are no shortage of wonderful ways and patterns and tools out there. You know, you've heard some of them presented at this conference. There's books about this stuff. But even with all the available information, even with all that stuff out there, I'd be working with teams and I'd start to notice this situation where our intuition often doesn't kind of match out what we need to do. And I tried to compare some of these examples here that I've noticed in my career. And some of them may sound familiar, some of them don't. But you'll be in situations where someone will say, we just need to execute. If we could just execute right now, everything would be okay. And usually what I've noticed is that's actually the time when you might need to fail or learn more. Like there's way too much momentum at that moment, and you're not maybe making the best decisions. One of the favorites, we just need more accountability. If we had more accountability, everything would be better. And what you actually find sometimes is you actually need more autonomy and trust. Like accountability becomes a trust proxy in your organization. What you really need is trust. What your intuition says is that we need accountability. A big favorite of mine, I've sort of stopped using estimates for most of the work that I do with teams, but if we just had better estimates, this would have all been perfect. We just needed better estimates to begin with. That's what our intuition says, but in actuality, at that point, we actually need to be able to plan a little bit more adaptively. We need to be more responsive to what's happening. We think we need to estimate 40 weeks worth of work, when in fact we need to make our batches a lot smaller, figure out how we can get value out in 2 days, or 1 week, or 2 weeks. How many people are familiar with SMART goals? Cool. SMART goals are totally valuable. I'm not trying to diss the value of SMART goals. Often, if you've ever been part of a SMART goal activity, do you know that feeling where you're feeling really smart because the goals are really, really smart, but you're kind of making it up. Let's be honest. Like you're writing what feels like a SMART goal. It's measurable. It's all these things, but there's a lot of missing assumptions there. There's a lot of uncertainty involved in that particular situation. So it's not that SMART goals aren't a very valuable tool. There's just something missing when you hear that. And one of my favorites is, if we had just set our goals a lot better, everything would have been easier. We just needed people more tightly aligned. And in general, what I've noticed is that everyone gets that, right? They understand that being aligned in that situation is the right thing to do. What they don't understand is that in their organization, alignment is super expensive. It's actually not practical. To get things aligned, you need layers of management. You need layers of human load balancers to be able to send out project work. You need a lot of different things. So goal setting is extremely valuable, but when we use it as a replacement for allowing common action or common purpose, you can get. So the reason why I wanted to start out with this in the talk is that it's not that the stuff on the left is not worthwhile, but what I've noticed over the years is that our gut intuition with a lot of goal setting and alignment is to kind of shift over to stuff on the left and maybe not pinch ourselves a little bit and think about what's happening on the right side if we have those, especially around things around common purpose and trust. Anyone who's worked in an organization where there's low trust knows what it feels like to have to create a ton of structure and process in your company because people essentially don't trust each other. That's a huge thing. So this is kind of what was on my mind when I was thinking about this talk. Now, specifically when it comes to goal setting, I'm sure a lot of this will become familiar, but OKRs are, for example, a very popular goal-setting approach that people have. They're popular for a reason. They're actually pretty effective. But what you notice with teams is they have all their business as usual, and then they take on all the new stuff as part of their OKRs, because OKRs are the new stuff, and we have to take on those particular goals. And then meanwhile, they've got business as usual. A great example of this is teams that have to keep software maintained or watch software that's in production. They have so much complexity to manage, and then you ask them to create new goals. Well, legitimately, one of their goals should be make sure things don't explode. But one of the pressures in OKR setting is to sort of come up with like a fancy goal that connects with the top-level new goal that the company has, and then somehow this poor ops team is juggling, making sure the system doesn't explode with like a fancy new goal that they have. So one of those, I've noticed that happen a lot of times when it comes to goal setting. Also, if you do OKRs, who does OKRs here? Have you ever noticed how all the OKRs seem to take 1 quarter when you do your OKRs every quarter? It's really funny. Like, what if you could get something done in a day? Oh, that'd be inconvenient. I mean, we'd have to do the whole OKR process all over again. Like, we can't do that. Everything needs to fit in a nice quarterly box. Well, we'll take on 3 things, and we'll get them done progressively through the quarter. Well, we kind of know what happens to that, right? It's like getting near the quarter, things are dropping off. So one of the things about the goal setting we do in our companies is it tends to be very dictated by schedules that don't necessarily match the work that we're doing. And that can be incredibly, I don't know if you've noticed this with teams, you fill the available space with a particular goal that you have. So whereas something might take 1 week, you somehow turn it into something that you're going to get done in a whole particular quarter. And it's pretty challenging. Another thing that quarterly goal setting, I don't know if you've noticed this, how funny it is that it's 90 days, right? But you spend like 1/9 or 1/8 of the quarter freaking out about what you're going to do next quarter and trying to figure out what you didn't get done that particular quarter. There's a lot of context switching that goes on with these particular things. A lot of the goals lack context. So there's a lot of baked-in knowledge around that goal that if I were to hand you the goal, you would say, well, what does that mean? I don't know what that means, or what would happen if I did this, or what would happen if I did that. So there's a lot of context missing. And how many of you who do OKRs end up sometimes having OKRs which are like, finish this project? It's not very outcome-oriented, right? It's not, it's not a key result. It's literally get done this project. Now, that project might bear fruit a year from now, and maybe finishing it now is the thing you do, but it's not exactly a key result that you're building in. So you get into these challenges. So the upshot here is I noticed over these years that there's sort of 4 key challenges when it comes to goal setting and alignment. And one is there are so many assumptions around our goals that go unsaid. For example, a great story. I remember talking to someone in UX, and she's very nice, very empathetic person, but said, I don't trust those developers, Unless we're there and they get this goal, they're going to go rogue. Like this last time, they were trying to optimize the purchase on this screen, and they totally did something that wasn't usable to make the goal. We can't let that happen again. It's like, well, when did you discuss your assumptions? Did you discuss the assumption, hey, in trying to optimize this particular flow, we're not going to break the user experience? No, we didn't actually discuss that assumption. So could you really blame the developer, right? They did what was in the box of the particular thing. So all of us have these assumptions that go unsaid in traditional goal-setting frameworks, especially OKRs. You don't see with OKRs a separate section that says, here's the 1 or 2 page brief. Although I have seen companies do that, and it's very effective. The second is building understanding around constraints. To get the autonomy you need in the organization, teams need to be aware of where the guardrails are for their particular effort. Otherwise, what you fall into is this very solution-focused, output-based goal for the team. Because when you boil it back, there's a lot of fear there. There's a lot of fear. What will happen if they break this experience? Or what will happen if they try to increase MPS the wrong way? Or what's going to happen when they do that? So understanding constraints is something that's often left out of OKRs. You've got this goal, but again, imagine I hand you the goal, you're a smart, problem-solving team. How could I go sort of off the guardrails and not know what else? So that was the second thing. The third thing is, and I'll try to demonstrate this later, is that we often come in with a very simplistic understanding of what the problem-solution dichotomy is in our company. The product development teams own the solution. Business gives them the problem. And I'll repeat this later because it's extremely important. Almost every business problem I see is actually a solution. Hit this quarter, make $100 million this quarter. Why? Why? New business, old business? Why should we increase it by 100 million? Why shouldn't we do 90 million and then get the fourth quarter like this? Or what problem are you trying to solve by getting $100 million this quarter? Well, we told our investors this and that and like this thing, and then we have the board meeting and it has to look good. Oh, so we're optimizing for the board thinking that we're doing a good job. Well, why don't we solve that problem another way? Maybe we don't need to hit $100 million this quarter. So the problem-solution dichotomy on teams, especially, so this is one of the things is, the most, and I put this in the description of the talk, the passionate people you really want on your teams are going to ask these questions. The people who just sit there and say, well, I guess they told us to put a drop down right there, and all right, here goes the drop down, it's great, and oh, custom fields, yeah, custom fields, awesome. Why do you need custom fields? Oh, well, to customize it. No, so you get these, you want those people who are going to say, no. What if we did nothing? Maybe that number will go up. I worked on an effort one time where there was this, I love the one developer, they said, I think there's seasonality in this, and I think the number's just going to go up. And I'm not working on this effort. And they happen to be someone who is pretty well known within the company, so they're just like, okay, well, just go and do your pet project. They're like, just do me this favor, split the customers, and let some customers not get the feature. Lo and behold, after hundreds of thousands of dollars of work, the number just went up. And so no one needed to do that work. That particular person was right. The final thing that I've noticed is that there's a common idea of this beautiful roll-up of goals that creates in the company where the executives get together, they create the goals, those go down to the next layer, to the next layer, to the next layer, to the next layer, and you get this in a lot of situations. And I'll propose, and I've done some drawings and later that might not be the ultimate way. That's one way to think about it. Management by objectives, that top-down form of management by objectives is one way, but it's not necessarily the only way. And when we do our OKRs and other goal-type setting, we can get a little lost in that type. We get fixated on the roll-up, and we go a little off the farm when we do that. If I'm using any word, I know there's a mixed audience of abilities and experience, so if I use any words that don't make any sense, please raise your hand. So we can continue. So I think I'm on time. So 14, all right, 16. Okay, so the session goals. It actually gets way more practical than as high level as I've made it in the beginning. I'm going to teach you a tool for kind of unpacking and mind mapping the shared assumptions that you have with a particular group, connecting those to goals, breaking down the problem-solution dichotomy, understanding your constraints, and then thinking about your work you're doing as experiments. We'll just teach something very practical. And I warn you in advance, it's going to seem, and what I like about it, it's going to seem ridiculously simple, which is good, I think. But trust me as we work through it that it's not as dumbed down as it seems. And I'd like to leave you confident that you could facilitate this activity with a small group back in your company next week. It should be that actionable that you should be able to take that next week. And higher level, my sort of wish list for goals is that you might walk away from this activity and start thinking about goal setting, which is normally a very stressful activity that you're trying to jam into the end of the quarter or the annual planning, as a sort of continuous activity of building shared understanding in your company. So instead of thinking as goal setting as, we're not going to get anything done if we set these goals, I challenge a lot of your companies that what if you remove the goals, what would happen? And it's an interesting question. Like, what if we did none of this? What if we did none of the OKRs? What if we just did what we did before? How much different would the company actually be? It's actually heretical to say that, right? Because all of our business thinking is based on, well, we'd be off the farm, no one would be aligned, no one would know what's going on, we'd never be able to figure it out. But I challenge you to even think about that. So I want you to see it as a continuous activity, as an activity of sense-making, which a lot of those in UX research know kind of about sense-making. And then hopefully in the coming months, you can build more deep alignment in your companies do that. So that's kind of my intro, and I think we're on target. So for the first kind of activity to set this up, I'd like kind of at your table to go spend 33, 46. Okay. Oh, good. Okay, we've got some time. It's about 13 minutes or 10 minutes to just talk over these questions. So the first question, if you're familiar to jobs to be done, it's a sort of UX way of thinking. We hire products to do jobs. I want you to think about process instead of jobs. What do we hire? I'll use an example. What do we hire sprints to do in our companies? What do we hire our OKR process to do in our company? But I even want you to take it more broadly. What job, because you're paying it with your time and your effort and your energy, what job are we hiring alignment? Personify alignment. Imagine alignment was this person. You could just walk into your company. You're hiring alignment. Alignment's this person. They drop in. What job are you hiring alignment to do? The second question is, what's the relationship between goals and alignment? Once you talk about that first thing, what job are we hiring goals? Are goals like the briefcase that alignment brings in? Or are they something else? The third question is, and you don't need to hit all these, maybe one will interest you, you can dig into it. The third is, can the drive for alignment backfire? How? And can there be too much alignment? Can your company be too aligned? And the final question, which will drive through the rest of the talk, is contrast what might be called as shallow alignment. I won't even tell you what shallow means, but just think about what it means. Contrast shallow alignment and deep alignment. So maybe for the next 10 minutes or 12 minutes or so. Cool, hopefully that was helpful. You got to know some things about the people at the table. It's, as someone who's done this for a while, that question often does hang in my head, like what if we didn't do it? Because I think that especially those of us in product and UX, like we're always dealing with murkiness, we just sit there in the middle, right? Even in UX, everyone's coming from all angles, right? And I think for me personally, I'm just thinking, this is me personally, how I think about it. I do gravitate towards that kind of shared understanding, shared purpose, because I think I've just seen temporary, everyone knows that meeting, like, great, cool, we all agree, right? Everyone nods their head, yep, we totally agree, right? Yep, we agree. And then 2 weeks later, you have an executive or someone saying like, I was at the same meeting as all you guys, I thought we all agreed. And that's our life, right? And the other thing with, I often say to product people, if you go high level, someone's going to beat you down to the lowest level that you can. If you go low level, someone's going to beat you, you need to show us the vision when you're talking about a feature. Okay, cool. And then you walk in next day like, here's the vision. Well, we really kind of need to get more practical. You get more practical. Here's the vision, right? You're chasing your tail a lot. So I think this is, I take a lot of this to heart at working in product because it's always ephemeral, right? You're always chasing this shared understanding. I draw these pictures. I don't know if anyone can see it. So I was trying to think to myself, what does alignment, what are two versions of alignment? And one is just sort of maybe a creative type. I imagine on the left, that's dealing with the project or dealing with the box or staying on track or hitting the milestones or management by objectives. A very efficient box with some executives outside of it, and you've put the guardrails. This is, and what you need to notice too, if you deal with creative people and creative problem solvers, when they seem to be getting a little bit angsty, it's because maybe we give them the impression that we're talking about a goal like the leftmost goal, even if we aren't, that communicates. When I think about words like mission or quest or freedom or impact or horizon, I see it more as like a sailboat. You're on a sailboat, you've got a point on the horizon that you need to get to, there's a lot of change, The point on the horizon is what you need to get to. You're with a skilled group of people who know how to respond to change, and the company sort of generally says, well, the boat's going to be getting towards the horizon. So I wanted to share, like, this is kind of how I view the difference between maybe shallow and deep alignment, but shallow alignment could definitely be, we all agree, and you don't agree. So I'm just showing some varied things. The other thing that I've noticed, and maybe you could think about where your company fits in, because I don't think there's one right answer here, actually. A lot of the management by objectives and OKR setting kind of is what's on the left, where a business benefit is sitting up there at the top, then some layer of people have thought about outcomes, maybe even like quantitative outcomes, they're sitting there. And then by the time you get down to the teams, it's very much dealing in an output mindset. And management by objectives, originally was set by, your manager. It was actually viewed, management by objectives was viewed as a very highly empowering thing for teams. The whole idea was you put an objective on the horizon and then you let the team go for doing it. In practice, a lot of times it sort of simulates this, where you get this heavy roll-up that happens. And some people argue, and I think they argue correctly, that that's the most efficient way that their company can run. I also deal with a lot of companies who deal with this bottommost example. It's very, 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 very different, which is where the teams are dealing with the customers and creating outcomes. I don't know if anyone can see the colors because the light's burnt out, but there's some little teal boxes there. And they are deriving benefits from the organization and being supported by the organization. It's a very, very, very different way of thinking about it. In that way, your CFO goes to work every day and says, how can I support the teams who are delivering outcomes to our customers and bringing benefits back to the business? Someone in HR says, how can I bring in the best people to be able to do this? The CEO says, how can I help today? I'm supporting you. You bring benefits by having a direct connection with the customers. And again, I don't think that there's a right or wrong in this, but I wanted to sort of posit that our common conception of goal setting, which is what's in the top, which is when I've surveyed people, about 70 to 80% describe a process similar to the one on the top. A lot of goal setting that trickle down, and then teams deliver on these output-oriented things. So I wanted to share that. In the last year or so, I've dealt with a couple teams, but I'll just tell a couple stories at the moment. There's a large company that builds sort of cloud services based in San Francisco, and I think they have like 70 highly, highly, highly autonomous teams, meaning they're setting their own roadmaps, they're connecting with their own customers, they're highly autonomous. But what's fascinating is what I was called in there to do. They said, we've mastered autonomy, but we can't get alignment. Meaning, across the organization, when this company wanted to go to market with something, or wanted to have a cohesive message to the market, they had trouble with that. And the reason I'm saying this is we often say, like, autonomy is the goal, or other people say, alignment's the goal, but depending on the organization, I would contrast with another organization that I dealt with that had 60 teams, very similar, had layers of program management, layers of project management, 2 layers of project management, OKRs, a whole rigid thing. They were highly aligned, but at what cost? It was an incredible cost to the creativity in the company that we mentioned. It was an incredible cost to pursuing outcomes for customers. It was an incredible difference. So the reason I'm mentioning this too is that anyone who says there's a right way, they say, well, you need, completely autonomous, self-organizing teams and do these things. It's like, yeah, but how is your company going to work? So I just want to present, although I have a little bit of a bias here, I acknowledge they're open things. So first activity, so now we're going to get to if we could make sure, I think we should do this in pairs. So I want you to take a brief moment to think about your 2018 New Year's resolutions, because it's fresh in everyone's mind. And I want you to think about a couple of them. Oh, caveats, right? Someone might see these. I think it's really good that you could use it for personal goals, but you might want to be able to share this one. And I'm going to use, for my example, I'm going to be hold on. Reduce time on social media. That's going to be mine. So once you've got that in mind, and again, this is you guys all have? So align your piece of paper this way, if you had questions about which way it was supposed to go. Okay. So just literally follow along. It's this easy. So right here, put your goal, your New Year's resolution. You can get a sense of how I did mine too, reduce time on social media, but it really doesn't matter. This is part of the nice thing here. Now, I'll move along at about this pace too, so I'm assuming people write quickly and did this. Now, it gets super specific. Just put a B right there. The B is for because. It's really simple. B is for because. Now, what is something that you know about this goal? It can either be something you know that makes it important, or something that you know maybe about the parameters of the goal. Like I use mine, I spend N hours per week on social media. That's something that I know. Put IK, I know, and if it was we, you'd put WK. There. So reduce time on social media because I know I spend N hours a week on social media. All right. Now, next. A. A is for assume. IA is for I assume. I reduce time on social media because I assume it will improve my focus. And again, the nice thing about this is, these can be, again, I could have many other things about reduced time on social media. I could say, I know that research points to the fact that too much social media is addictive and it will burn my brain cells. I assume that my significant other hates it when I spend time on social media, except she does too. It could be a number of things. I know she does too. I assume that it annoys her, right? So you could keep going on. But anyway, so that's all that we need right there, the IK and the IA. Now, BT, by trying. It's really easy, trying, by trying. So I want you to think of 3 things that you can do to forward that particular goal. This is flexible, so if you got super specific, get more specific. If you got super broad, go one level down below that. What are 3 things that I could do to be able to try, what might I try to influence that particular goal? My 3 were no social media after 9 p.m., no social media on Sundays, and no Facebook on phone. I could try deleting Facebook from my phone. I could try any of these things. Any questions on this one? By trying. Operative is the word trying, because who knows, it might not work. It's all an experiment, really. I know one of those totally didn't work. So we get 3 of those going. Has everyone kind of got their 3 in there? It's tough with pacing, so okay, great. Now, 2 more things. It gets super easy. W is for while, and WO is for without. This is probably the hardest one to wrap your head around because it just takes 2 seconds to get it. In my pursuit of the goal of reducing time on social media, for which I know that I spend hours per week, and I assume that it will improve my focus, in my pursuit of that goal, what constraints am I operating under? So, reduce my time, while, my 2 examples. Staying in touch with friends, and without ignoring Twitter direct messages where I get contacted about conferences and things like that. So while staying in touch with friends and without ignoring Twitter DMs. So for yours, think about classic ones like this might be with your New Year's resolution, like without maybe letting some very important duties, like as a parent, slide, or Maybe you're a particularly self-focused goal, but you want to make sure if you have kids that you don't lose time spent with kids. Or it might be a cost restriction, like you want to start doing a lot of camping, but you want to keep your expenditure for camping under a certain amount of money per month. These are all constraints that you're operating under. Cool. So everyone following this? This is the dumb it down hour. Like, this is good. So let's just recap. My goal is to reduce time on social media because I know I spend hours per week and I assume it'll improve my focus. I want to do that while staying in touch with my friends and also not ignoring my Twitter DMs. I'm considering trying no social media after 9 p.m., no social media on Sundays, and no Facebook on my phone. Easy. It just reads like a sentence when you got it. Now, next. It's where it gets interesting. The beauty of mind mapping like this is you can just keep nesting as long as you need, and I'll explain why. So I have a by trying. I'm going to, let's see, did I draw the line? No, okay. I'm going to try no Facebook on phone because IA is I assume. Facebook on the phone is a large percentage of the time. Let's say I don't know. My gut instinct is that Facebook is a large percentage of the time. So you can imagine, imagine there's a line drawing from there to there. So think about an assumption that you have about one of your by tryings. Did that resonate? Does that click with people? So I took no Facebook on phone, and I took it one level of assumptions deeper, and I said, because I assume, B is for because, I is for I assume, Facebook on the phone is a large percentage of the time. Doesn't get any more, I'm just giving some examples of the kind of edge cases here. Next, let's do a by I know, but for one of my constraints. I want to ignore Twitter DMs. I want to do this without ignoring Twitter DMs because I know I get to speak at conferences because of DMs. So I'm connecting that, there wasn't a lot of room on thing, but I'm connecting my without ignoring Twitter DMs to a I know. Because I know, I get to speak at conferences. So try connecting one of your whiles or withouts to an assumption or no statement. All right, getting close. This is where it gets really cool. Oh, there's a goal on top of all this. So why do I want to reduce time on social media? Reduce time on social media is my by trying, if you think about it. What am I trying to get done? More quality time each day. So let me read it out. My goal is to get more quality time each day. One thing I'm going to do is try is reducing time on social media because I know I spend 10 hours per week and I assume it will improve my focus. While doing that, I want to stay in touch with friends and not ignore my Twitter DMs because I know I get to speak at conferences because of DMs. 3 things I'm trying are no social media after 9 p.m., no social media on Sundays, and no Facebook on phone because I assume that Facebook on the phone is a large percentage of the time I spend. So I've done this with teams where a whole wall from a 3-year company goal produces about 200 to 300 stickies. Over and over and over. Why do we assume that to be the case? What do we do? And so my goal was to give you the handout, but because the colors got mixed up, but maybe what you could do is, do you see how the colors, I had a little legend? What I was going to ask you to do is just fill in. I was going to ask you to draw lines, if you feel like drawing lines. Let's spend some time drawing the lines. It reinforces the idea. So draw the lines where I've drawn the lines. Okay, so we've got some lines, connects it all together. So when you're doing this as a facilitated activity, you can use string or do it on a huge whiteboard and start drawing lines like crazy. And it's incredible. You need a really big whiteboard if you're doing this doing it for a company. String is actually very tactile, and I like it for another reason, because when you're done, you can do it on a wall, and it actually can be like a permanent, semi-permanent artifact in your company that you keep updating. You have your assumption map on the wall, and you keep coming back to it. I'm not going to do that. I was going to add this, maybe just try to remind yourself, just write the words. By trying, because, yeah, you can use the legend. BT, by trying, B, because, A, assume, K, no, W, O, W, without, and while. Bingo. It's one of the really nice traits of this when talking to a particular team, because honestly, the executives might not even have that goal. What you might want to do is you might want to walk into leaders of the company and say, this is our mental model, but what's up there? Because we can keep taking it up there. We can keep going higher to that particular thing. Or you can start down with, let's just say the thing down on the thing is you can add by tryings as deep as you want to go. So let's say we have no social media after 9 p.m. By trying, that's not that difficult. Like, oh, but the alarm. Okay, no social media after 9 p.m. while making sure I can get up the next morning by buying an old school alarm clock. Right? I can keep going down to the right. But you brought up an interesting thing. I started it like that on purpose to show that you can move in both directions. You know, in this ideal world, it would always be up there. One thing you notice in organizations is once you do the map on the wall, almost everything to the left, like things just very rarely change. The central hypothesis for your business, and anyone who's been involved in a startup knows this, you know, this whole idea of product market fit, like after a year or two, a lot of the future of the startup has been decided by how you raised money, what your first product was, like how you went to market with your first product. After that, a lot of these assumptions are not changing the further you get to the left. What you can do in the sort of more advanced part of this too is instead of it looking like a kind of weird hierarchical graph, it becomes more of a network. So you might find you have goals that are actually achieved by many by tryings, but that's a more advanced version of this, and that's when you start to lose that a little bit because it's not flowing down a ladder like that particular thing. Any other questions or comments? Difficulties anyone had? Did anyone feel like they got the wrong goal in the beginning, like they didn't have enough room? Or you picked the wrong thing? That's good, I guess? Yeah, okay, so, yeah, go ahead. Yeah. So the nice thing I like about this in terms of for facilitators among us is that effect of having some people who are like maybe could have done it differently, we still got through it. You know, like you can facilitate this in many different ways. So that's one advantage of doing things. But yeah, it's very normal to tweak the particular thing. Any other feedback, comment? Yep?
Do you recommend facilitating this as like a single activity?
I'll get to some of the hows and what's a bit. Cool. So the nice thing is we did that as kind of a participatory activity without me even needing to explain how it worked, which is a really, really nice thing that you can do that disarms teams into thinking about this thing. The beauty of it is once the team starts to operate with these words, it guides all discussions after that. So you're in a particular meeting, they're like, what do we assume about that? What do we know? Or someone's saying like, well, it sounds like we're going to need to try this. Or, hey, you know, while we're doing that, let's make sure that we keep this, or let's not mess up these particular things. Well, we're going to go through some of the words now in more depth. You okay? It's pretty hot, right? Right there? Okay, cool. I'm hot. So here's some of the leading questions, and I'll share this deck because this will be helpful. So I asked you some of this. So when we go to the because we know or assume, the question is why is it important for us to achieve this goal? What do we know and assume that makes this goal worthwhile? Imagine a person in your company asking, why are we shooting for that? Why are we going? Like, how would you answer that question? As trivial as it sounds, with PMs that I work with, I do the hallway test. In 20 seconds, you have to be able to explain, so I pretty much know what you're doing the next quarter. Like, it should be that fast. You should be able to do it in 3 tweets. It's really, you can carry a lot of context all with these particular words that you're using, but I want them to be able to say, why are we shooting that? What do we know? What are we shooting for at this particular point? What are our assumptions? Why is it important to achieve this goal? And these are usually some good prompt questions. The important thing to keep in mind here is that for many teams, why it's important, it's complete. Sometimes the team will be like, because we care a lot about it. And sometimes they'll say, because we know we care a lot about it. And sometimes they'll say, because we know that customers complain every single day about this and it really bums us out. So be prepared for that. Like, that's why it's left intentionally open. No does not always need to represent some quantitative, you know, XYZ to do these things. Do these questions generally, do you feel that these are sufficient leads for that? So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, because later on in the activity, each table is going to work with people's goals. So I want to make sure that we're good. So there's a couple things around the because we know and assume that are the gotchas that I wanted to bring out because I think they're interesting when we do this. The one is this idea of operating assumptions within your company. And if you've been in a startup, you understand that it's an inherently risky thing that you're involved with. And often the operating assumption of the business is shaky. If it wasn't shaky, everyone would be doing it, right? So, let's just go back to companies I've worked with. Now it's a long time. So at Zendesk, the assumption was, wow, we can make user-friendly support software back in 2008, right? And there's such a thing as user-friendly support thing, and we can deliver this, right? That was one of their assumptions, and during the early years, there was a lot of questions about that, like, hey, traditional ticketing software doesn't look like this. It doesn't behave like this. We don't sell like other people sell. Self-service won't work, but they had an operating assumption that this was their market assumption that they were going to be able to do that. And that's an extremely important thing with teams, because this is what I've noticed with teams, is that the elephant is in the room. And every meeting, a team member will go like, yeah, well, we know that's never going to happen. And it comes up every single meeting. The same person asks the same thing. So as a product manager, part of your job there is to say, it might not. You're absolutely right. If it was a 95% chance that was going to happen, we wouldn't be in this business. I think it's about a 30-40% chance that might work out. But it's our operating assumption at the moment that that's going to work out. So we can stop questioning this every single meeting, because I'm going to keep giving you that exact same answer. But it's something for you to think about. Like, what are the operating assumptions that your business runs on that you keep questioning over and over again? So that's one of the caveats to this. The way you work that into the mind map is you can say, you could have a color code that I've seen teams do, go operating. This is an assumption, but it's an operating assumption. We're not changing this. I'll go through some of these pretty quickly, but you're doing this right if the team is challenging your assumptions. You're doing this right when someone in the room is like, we don't know that. Not at all. We don't know that at all. Or someone says, that's an assumption. That's not a no. Or someone says, look, I actually was looking at data the other day. Legitimately, this is a no. Nah, it's a little too high level. You don't know that. You know that these numbers did that. So these are the signs to look for that this is working the right way in your team. What was I thinking with wild-ass guess? Oh yes, some of these things are going to be a wild-ass guess, right? Right? So this is what I was trying to get into about operating. I think what I was really trying to hammer through is this operating assumptions. Is that a lot of I worked with a salesperson once, and it was one of the most meaningful moments of my career, and I was about to facilitate some activity with all the salespeople. I'm like, oh, we're going to talk about our assumptions, we're going to talk about everything, and the salesperson said, I need them to drink the Kool-Aid now. I don't want to do this activity. I need to suspend disbelief, because my salespeople, if we opened up to the idea that the whole boat was falling apart, we wouldn't be able to do our jobs. And it was a very meaningful moment in my career, because my instinct was to say, oh, you got to be kidding. Oh, the people aren't smart enough to get it. Or you're demeaning your people. That's my instinct. But when I stepped back and thought about it, I was like, wow, this is pretty deep. Sometimes we need to suspend disbelief in our organizations. We need to create, because we're betting. We're betting a 30% chance that this is going to work out. It's a meaningful thing that you run into. And I just call those the elephants in the room. So one team I had, the reason why I'm mentioning this is one team brought a whole book of stickers that had elephants on it. And anytime they got to an assumption that they thought was an elephant in the room assumption that people just kept lurking and haunting people, they put a huge elephant sticker on the assumption, and that helped the team depersonalize. It was a very personal topic, these things, and it was actually around usability. It was about whether usability really mattered. Every discussion would go on and on. I think it matters, right? I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think it mattered. But every discussion would get there, and some executive at the end would be like, well, at the end of the day, if we ship these 3 things, that's going to create revenue, and the usability tweaks you have are not going to create revenue. So they just took the huge elephant sticker and put that on the assumption. And they actually framed it as we know from studies that usability has a link to additional revenue for companies, and they listed the studies, and then they put the executives, I assume that the higher revenue opportunities are greater than the thing. So it was kind of a nice way to bring that out. So that's why I'm bringing out some of these things. It gets to be pretty interesting. So this is the quick, we'll do this really, really quickly. So these are the things, are the goals. So let's say I come to you and I say, here's my goal, decrease time to resolution for our support cases. What's something that we might assume that would support that goal? Anyone? Decrease time to resolution for our support cases. Go ahead.
I assume our clients will be happier.
Yep. Okay. Great. Next one. No, yeah. Go ahead.
Current time to resolution is too long.
Right. What exactly? Anyone else? Because decrease time to resolution for our support cases. What might you know or assume?
They're expensive.
Great. Yeah. We could save money. We're spending a lot of time. Any other things you might know or assume? We'll go through these quickly. I just want now it's more collaborative, right? Okay, next one. Increase the number of internal employee referrals. What might we know that would support that goal? Or what might we assume? Yeah.
Stay longer.
Yeah, perfect. You might even have data around that, right? And I think there's probably studies that demonstrate that. Yeah, go ahead.
We assume that the quality of the employee, the applicants will be stronger.
Yep, perfect. Yep.
Accountability and trust, because you know each other.
Yeah, totally. What other things do you assume about, I don't know, maybe like assume knowledge transfer might be easier? Yeah.
You assume that employee referrals are worthwhile at all?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So just this little interaction that we have is extremely similar, and that's why this is a nice thing for our toolbox, because we can use it with HR. We can use it with company goals. We can walk into a CEO of the company and start unpacking some of these particular goals. So let's just say I worked with an accounting package. Decrease the time it takes for accountants to reconcile their books. What might we know that supports that? Anyone do accounting type software? Anyone? Workfront? I'll tell you what we knew at that point. We knew that the accountants were the most underappreciated people in their particular companies, and they were not getting raises because their bosses were telling them that the new software was going to let them move a lot faster and do these things. So we knew that we could become, they kept saying, we'll fall in love with you if you can make this faster. We will keep the software working in our business for as long as we're alive. If you can reduce this time, because it's the most frustrating thing that we did. It's really meaningful from a UX standpoint. Who has a good classic example about something you thought you knew about your customers, but was proven to be incorrect? You just knew, everyone knew, the CEO knew, everyone knew, but it was proven to be incorrect.
People want to use interview guides to conduct an interview.
They want to use interview guides to conduct interviews. What was the impact of that assumption to your business without? And so the interesting thing here, what I find interesting about these assumptions is, would anything have happened if you had done this exercise? And you could say no. You would have done the exercise and someone would have said, I've got an assumption that this. But the key thing is, if you had this on the wall and if your teams were engaged with this, every time you're looking at that, and I've seen developers especially do this, be like, that's just has been sitting there. I really don't know about that assumption. We have contradictory data here. I'm not sure about that. The other thing that you see is an operating assumption that the CEO or maybe the founders are hanging on to for the company, and just everyone is like, it's just not like that. You can't pretend that that's the case anymore, so you see these things. While and without is an interesting one. I won't go too deep into while and without, but the best place to work with this, especially if you're involved in UX, is what we tend to do when we have all these new goals is we forget the health metrics of our company. What needs to exist when we're working within our company. So you things like org debt, UX debt, technical debt, the workload, the psychological safety of people on the teams, attrition of employees as you begin to grow. All these things are things that you have to preserve. There's many other constraints. So I'm using these as a particular example of things just tease out from the situation. Often when people think about constraints in the project management world is iron triangle, scope, cost, this and that. And I'm not dissing on that, I kind of am. But No, the only reason I'm dissing on it is in that most of us are working in what would be regarded more as service ecologies. We're not working in project-oriented work. Like our products outlive the project. It's more of an ecosystem. It's not a project you ship out. Maybe you are actually in this business, which is fine if you're in that business. If you're in the business of shipping something and someone paying cash on delivery, fine. Do the iron triangle because it's perfect for your business. But most of us aren't working in those particular environments at the moment. So, I think that that's an example of that world has constraints, but we might have other constraints. But maybe one of the constraints is, and I'm just giving you examples, we really don't want to fund more than $200,000 or 8 weeks to learn about that. Can we constrain the effort? Any solutions you have, let's make sure that we can do them generally in this time frame for under 200K for direct developer time to be able to do this. So they could be health metrics. They could be financial constraints, like the traditional scope constraints. Or they could be without, one of my favorites, like without sacrificing our mission of making users awesome. The team was just like, that's it. Like, we're always going to keep that constraint in mind. So here's the fascinating thing. Like, everyone talks about their kind of company culture, their company objectives, their company things. Imagine if those were added as a default template to every time you did if you did this type of initiative. Right there. While doing this from your company initiative, doing this, respecting the customer, all those things that we give lip service to, but we don't often bake into every single effort that we're doing. So I don't want to go too deep into here. The final thing about while without, the best thing I can imagine is, a good example is you walk to a team and give them the goal, the assumptions, and the while without, but no by trying. Do they have all the information they need to not go off the farm and be creative and do the job that they need to do? So the nice thing about that is product people were said, well, hand them the problem, and the team will come up with a solution. But there's a lot more assumptions baked into that. There's a lot more sort of thinking that we need to do to make that accessible for the team. So what I would propose is you can use this activity as a product person individually in your mind to go through kind of the box you want to create around the effort, and then hand it to a team without the by trying elements in there. And I'll give an example of that later. So these are the fun ones. Okay, imagine your while without statements. Goal, hit a sales number. What don't we want to destroy in our effort to hit the sales number? Company morale. Profits. Customer satisfaction. This is the classic one. And I guarantee you, I can't believe it's like 70% of the teams don't sort of explicitly state this goal. They'll have a sales goal, but no one actually says, like, we want to do that without doing these particular things. There's a famous study around project management, which is if you have more than 2 main dependencies, the chance of your project success goes way, way down, and you need more floats. So floats are things that you are negotiable. This is a great reality check, like, man, this is like threading the needle. There's no way we're going to meet all these constraints in while without to be able to do these things. Here's some fun ones from my career. Maybe you've experienced. Increase the number of self-service signups. Sounds awesome. What constraints might you want to put on that? What while without?
Without alienating your hands-on customers?
Without alienating the hands-on, high-touch customers? Anyone from the back? What wouldn't we want to do? What must we preserve in our effort to limit self-service signups? Yep, exactly. You might not want to erode the price point for your product. Suddenly everyone's like, yeah, the free one's pretty damn good. I use the self-service works fine. I'm doing great with that. I don't want to give you the extra money. That one was a good one. I think someone here is from Vail Resorts. What could go wrong if you incentivize people to maximize the runs the average skier can get in during the day? Safety. Classic, thing. You could incentivize people, especially at altitude, who might not be in shape, to totally go beyond their limits, which is why I'm not skiing. Because I don't want to destroy myself and then have a kid soon. That would be the worst thing ever. Okay, this kind of is important because it ties into a lot of this. So I thought to myself one day, when you're thinking about by trying, what when I talked about that problem-solution dichotomy being artificial in some ways, it's not just problem and solution. What I wanted to come up with is an easy way for all of you to be able to level set between these levels for your team. What is the team empowered to do? And so let's just talk through these. 1, build exactly this. To me, that's, here's the spec, here's the wire, like here's all the things. Build exactly this. That's 1. 2, build something that does X, Y, and Z. A little better, right? Like, I'm not going to hand you the spec, but it should do this. It should let the person do exactly this, and it should have these particular benefits. And I'll share this with you afterwards. I think it's really helpful, actually. 3, a little different. Build something that lets customers do. It starts to guide it a little bit more towards the customer out, like the end goal of what the customer had in mind. Not, and then they're going to go to this screen and this screen and this screen, which is the number 2. But number 3 is more like the customer should be able to submit, their PTO requests, something like that. 4, solve the customer problem. Okay, now we're getting interesting, right? Now it's more like the customer problem is around PTO requests. You're not saying like what the desired output is. Anyone who's in UX research looks at these and like loves it because you know that the more the numbers go up, the more that you're going to be engaged in actually sort of figuring out what the real gist of this is. 5, improve the experience for some segments. So instead of sort of deciding what's wrong for the customer, you just generally say like, hey, our accountants appear to be like kind of having a crappy experience. I'd like you to improve the experience. So that gives the team a little bit more autonomy, right? You have to find out what's causing the problem that's creating the bad experience. 6, optimize this metric. It's kind of, I guess 5 and 6 are sort of the same thing. If you found out a way to measure the experience, you'd have the same thing, but the team is just generally told, hey, just improve NPS. That's all I really care about. Hopefully that's not all you care about, but like doing that thing. 7 is generate this business outcome in the short term. Help us hit this quarter. That's a short-term business outcome. And then the 8 is generate this business outcome long term. A sustainable business in IoT, or like some high-level thing. And so what I wanted to take, let's see what time, I think we're doing okay. So the reason why that's an important activity is, again, it's all kind of fitting into this mind mapping thing. You're not going to get very far if you need to understand that spectrum exists, because when you do this on a wide scale, in even a department, you might have 7 levels deep. So what I'm trying to challenge you with is to think about, the trick there is your tendency will be like how I did my by trying, well, Facebook is going to do this thing. You want to look for opportunities to get an intermediary outcome on that spectrum in between the particular things. Like if you jump straight down to, when you're doing this with teams, especially, it's all about the feature. It's all about your idea. What's your idea? How are you going to get that thing? How are you going to do the thing? And what you really want to interject as a facilitator, be like, what would progress look like towards that? Oh, increasing this metric. Oh, that sounds like a good intermediary goal. Let's put that in there. And that's what allows these mind maps to get the depth that you need. And that's where you as a facilitator, so as an example, I'll show you some examples coming up that will have it make more sense. But that's where you really need to, I'd say it's the one kind of, there's a couple of weaknesses with the approach, but the one is it very much relies on someone to challenge that. Because otherwise you get a 2-level deep thing where the goal of the company is to make this revenue, and then someone is like, okay, well that means we just got to get this project done. There's really about 5 things fit in between there. If you're a director or if you're a VP and you're sitting there, that's when you start thinking like, if you're doing that MBO style roll down, you're like, well, he's told us we need a new revenue generating business and we need to, whatever, the Zendesk public, we're going to try to hit $1 billion in yearly revenue by 2020. That's the long-term business goal. You've got to work it back in your own mind what those things is. Because you're doing it right if the majority of the map is not changing a lot. The world is, and this is what I was talking about, the cost of alignment. My sense is we all go to work and we want this environment where we feel a common purpose, we want to feel like we're all on the same page, we're moving, but alignment is incredibly expensive. It's incredibly, it's too hard to be aligned. And so we just keep snowballing to these things, we keep chasing our tails. A lot of times you see that with quarterly goals, where every quarter it just seems like the whole world is changing. Really, hopefully your tactics are changing, not the rocks that you're trying to move. And that's one of the main things when I tell PMs, and I work with them, where's your 12-month roadmap? Or I'm thinking about that. And I'm not asking them for features, I want outcomes, because I just do outcome-driven roadmaps. I don't really mention the features on the roadmap. Oh, I'm waiting for the quarter to begin. I'm like, no, it should always be up to date. Anytime I come to you, there should be a rolling 12-month thing. But I don't know what's going to happen, but I don't know. Great. Say, I don't know. Put a huge question mark on the roadmap. Say, I don't know because you have not given me this information. I am assuming these things. So what we see a lot of times is the confusion or the messiness in our organizations has people just kind of throw their hands up. Now, when it comes to very rigid project plans, totally I can see that, right? Like, why spend a month to make the rigid project plans so that I'm going to be able to do that? It doesn't really give us an excuse to not have tweet-length answers to these things. And I've noticed that among the best PMs I work with are incredibly good at explaining their calculus very quickly. We don't know that, that's open. A quick story there, we had fires in Santa Barbara where I live, and every day there was a meeting, where a town hall where the firemen came and gave a talk. Started with an emotional story. It went to situational analysis of what happened yesterday, what's happened. Then they brought in the data person who understood the fuels that existed and the weather. Then they talked about their plan for the next day. Highly chaotic, complex situation. It was, line A is this. We're going to draw this fire line here. That's our first line of defense. Line B is if it exceeds that fire line, we're going to torch this ridge, and then we're going to do that. It's going to drive the fire to thing. When that fails, provided the weather does that, plan C is we're going to do this thing. They weren't getting into the plan so much as explaining to everyone in the audience the heuristics of their decisions. And I've noticed that among the best product leaders that I work with, they're not making shit up, but they're explaining things in a sort of rational, measured way, and I feel that these maps can very much help you do that, to be able to deliver that kind of response. Because we exist in messiness. We exist in messiness, but it doesn't, the response is, well, we've got to have a plan. Maybe, but I see it more as we need a plan heuristic. We need to be able to explain the environment we're working in so people just don't throw their hands up and say, it's not worth it. Okay, very quick things. As you notice, you can add a B to a KA. That's funny. You can add a because, I know, or assume to a while without or by trying. So you can add these things to each other. Anytime you have assumptions or data, you can add a know or assume, even to your constraints. So it can nest like that, and I'll give you examples. Actually, I'll just give you the examples. I talk. All right. I don't know who can see that, bad color choice for the day, but here's a very simple one. Further up is some company goal. We are going to do this by decreasing churn by 20%. Let's just follow down that line. We don't fill out the other ones. By improving coaching session satisfaction, let's say we coach our customers to use our product well, we're going to improve coaching session satisfaction from 3.5 to 4.5 out of 5. Down one more level deep. By prioritize at-risk customers, by open online scheduling, by shorter, more focused coaching sessions with our customers. I'm just showing you the depth there. We've just gone down by. We didn't fill in, hey, we decreased churn by 20%. Awesome, shorter, more focused sessions. We added the intermediary steps in there so that we could add some flexibility to the team.
So you're just leveling, you're just adding additional.
Yeah.
Right? What are all of the different ways?
Exactly, there, and then we can select from those options. It's good when you're doing brainstorming activities that everyone's contributing ideas. And often what you'll get is you'll get the chart and then a huge blowout for the by tryings. And then that's what prioritization is about. You have to think about what has a good shot of doing those things. But I'm just showing you how you can nest these. There's great mind mapping tools, Mindmapping and other things that you can use online that allow you to get the 300 boxes if you don't want to use a wall or if you're working with remote teams. Here's another one. It goes deep. So we're going back to our same thing, rolling out another part. Improving coaching session satisfaction by 3.5 to 4.5 out of 5, while without adding headcount to the customer success team because we know we have no budget left this fiscal year. Okay, because there's always going to be that person in the room that's like, why don't we just hire more people? That would be a standard thing. You could hire more people to do it. So that's how you can blow out the while without. Can just move down there. And then by open online scheduling without impacting our normal 24-hour case resolution time because it keeps moving down as you do that. So one of our ideas is to do open online scheduling, but we realize that if we do open online scheduling, we have a potential to disrupt our customer service team because they'll be getting meetings at all sorts of odd times that they didn't expect, and then that might disrupt our normal turnaround for support. So I just wanted to explain those, that you can do this. So, which brings us to some activity things. So I'm just going to give you some facilitation tips and like when you might do this, how you might do it. Two things that I didn't mention. We'll get through these. The sun is crazy. Okay, great. I just wanted to discuss when you might find this to be valuable. So ideally, in the next week or two, I'd like you to use this because you can practice it. So there's a couple cases. One is maybe you're kicking off an initiative. Sometimes people do design sprints, or they do other things where they set aside some time for assumption mapping or trying to do brainstorming. A perfect time to do this is as an activity before you do ideation. As I mentioned, leaving out the by trying. Like get the map pretty much set, and then scope the by tryings to like what you're trying to do. And it can make those activities very helpful as you're kicking something off. Another area to use it, and this I sort of use this very broadly, is when you sense that your solutions are over-constrained or are based on very, very risky assumptions or variable sets of assumptions. Usually when you sense that, it's even worse than what you sense, right? So if you're getting that feeling like, oh, this is like playing three-dimensional chess, and then marketing saying they need that before the conference because they decided to run their own conference, why you do that, and then, and we've got these different things going on. Usually the sign then is multiplied by 2, right? That's a good time to start mapping these because there's probably twice as many assumptions and twice as many constraints as you're imagining that exist. The third one is if you do OKRs. If you don't, we could sync up afterwards. I can lead you in the right direction for them. It's a great activity to do with potentially executives prior to the OKR building activities to get their story straight. Can we just get down to like year goals here, at least, like before everyone bangs their head against the wall trying to guess what you're talking about? Because again, it's these, what are the assumptions based on the goals? Often what they're doing is someone's looking at a spreadsheet and says like, well, if the line just goes up just like that, that's going to be perfect, and it's going to be up and to the right, and it's going to be great. The goal is, and then they do goal seek, in Excel. They go, growth rate needs to be 40%, so I'm going to just make this number go up until this goes 40%, and that's what I'm going to bring to the team. That's not very helpful. Like, it might be helpful. It might exactly be what the business needs to do to produce, 40% quarter-over-quarter growth, year-over-year growth for that, but it might not help the teams know anything about the baked-in assumptions about when you're doing that. So you can do it with executives prior to an OKR building. I highly suggest you can consider making it a permanent artifact. And that's where I've seen some great success, which is a hallway somewhere on the team floor is your assumption map. There are assumption maps, your goal, what you're currently doing. Because if you do this right, anyone should be able to go in front of that and know the story. If you have a new hire, they can just walk in and look at it. Be like, oh, I see, because our goal in 3 years is to be the preeminent training solutions provider in the mountain region, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this, and that's why our quarter goals are this particular thing, and that's why the team is building the drop down. Like at the end, like all the way down on the right. And then, like I said before, is sort of a catalyst for brainstorming exercise. It's so much easier to brainstorm when you can hand people or collaborate with the team and look at your mind map and just meditate on that for 5-10 minutes before you go into the silent brainstorming of what you're doing for a solution. Because then everyone's operating on the same map. Everyone's operating on the same map. And ideally, you involve those people in creating the map. So you get that out of the way. You get the messiness out of the way to leave the kind of creativity for solutioning open. So it's very valuable for that. So how questions? The questions are super easy, and I've just kind of adapted them over time. But, why is a good question. What do we know? What do we assume? You can go a long way in this exercise by saying those 3 questions. Why? It's like 5 whys. But it's a little different, right? You're asking for like, why is that important? Why is that meaningful? For while without, what could go wrong? What must we keep in mind? Assume someone saw this framework and just went with it. What could go wrong for they doing? Can you hand this as is to someone? So these are questions. What could go wrong? What should we respect? What lines shouldn't we cross when we're doing this? For the by trying, pretty simple, like what can we try here? And even that phrase is very powerful. Once you shift from what can we do to what can we try, things work. In my experience, most of our companies are not making enough acknowledged failures. And I'm not saying the big, fail fast. I don't think we should necessarily celebrate failures, but we're probably not pushing the limits enough if we aren't failing legitimately half the time. Unless you're in a kind of more stable business or in a more stable arena where your competitors are not failing half the time either, right? Like people are trying to eke out the last 3% of a margin or doing those things. But in a lot of our fast-growing businesses, you're kind of not pushing it enough. What that means, though, is the other half succeeds, and you know what failure looks like, and you know what success looks like. So just that discussion can be very helpful. The facilitation side of this, I suggest PMs can do this themselves. Like, I've had people come out of the workshops where the PM just went off to a room and just like, I'm on a roll now, I'm just going to figure out I can figure out what I need to figure out now. Or in a facilitated activity, I really like having other people from the org facilitate. So if you're a product manager, you can participate. I think it's a huge problem with a lot of UX folk who are asked to be a facilitator for UX research and product folk who are thrown in to be facilitators. I think it's important that we have opinions and that we have a point of view. And trying to juggle the need, like having to be a facilitator and be a participant can be really, really hard. So I would advise if you can pull in someone else, because it's so easy, anyone in your company could do it, then you can bring in the facilitator from some other part of the company and say, hey, I'd like to participate. And it's much better, I think, when you can do that. And it's a super simple thing to try. And I think finally the important things is stressing at all times there's no right or wrong answer. It's active artifact. This is not here to figure out your future in the company for the next year or two. We're here to enable autonomy, enable, like all these kind of classic things. They seem kind of, extraneous, but when you're facilitating, it's important to remind people that they're not being tested on their ability to. The teams that do this the best, they're throwing out assumptions they don't even know if they're real or not. I remember one, we're assuming that the holidays are going to be a shit show because no one's going to get anything done. And then they thought they were saying the craziest thing in the world, and then 3 people in the room are like, you know what? No, I think that's a no. If you look at the last couple years, the holidays have always been a shit show. We just don't get enough done. People are taking legitimate days off, and then we just hit we're doing crazy hours. It turned into a no to do this thing. So there's nothing off bounds. It's traditional facilitator stuff, but just some things to keep in mind. And so I guess, we have 4 minutes. It's not a lot of time. Does anyone have any specific questions?